بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين أما بعد. I just want to begin by saying Alhamdulillah that it's been about 15 months I think since we began to meet virtually, and now Alhamdulillah after a major trial, a major test in life that every single person on earth literally was affected by, or most people on earth were affected by directly. Alhamdulillah, we are back slowly but surely going back to normal life. So, we began this test by reminding ourselves of the various ahadith that show the virtue of being patient, in particularly such a context that we are in, the pandemic. As we return, let us be thankful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He has gotten us through this far without any damage to ourselves, or alhamdulillah, we are healthy, and inshallah the reward of such a situation has been written for us on the Day of Judgment and for the afterlife. Ya Rabbil Alameen. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept from us. Inshallah, today we enter a new station, manzilat al-Bast, and the word Bast is basata, means to expand something or to prolong it, make it longer, and essentially, what this is referring to, or this station really does, is it further expands the previous stations we've been going through. So for the past maybe 4 or 5 stations, if not more, it's really been talking about character, akhlaq, manners, good character, etc. And this one comes, and essentially if each of those characters or stations were a particular aspect of the human self, how we behave with one another. So you have 5 different circles. Essentially what Bast does is expand each circle to be bigger. So if patience is part of spirituality, then Bast comes and makes our patience even bigger, greater. If generosity is part of Iman, Bast comes and makes our generosity even more. So that's the general idea here. And it's more than just being or deepening our character, our good character and our manners. It's more than just deepening it. But Ibn Qayyim rahmatullahi alayhi says that هي داعية لمحبة الخلق. This station, the end goal of it is to love the creation. To love the creation. Because these good characteristics will never be fully perfected. They will not reach the deep levels that we aspire towards until we have a type of love for the creation. And I don't know if we've spoken about this before in this series or not, but when you look at the mercy of the prophets in general, specifically the Prophet ﷺ, and you think of their mercy, and how were they able to retain and maintain their patience and their mercy and their kindness towards even their most vicious enemies. I mean, to the extent that they will forgive anything and everything that their enemies have done to them. How were they able to do that? And the analogy I like to give is the following. For the prophets, their end goal is to get humanity to paradise and to save them from falling into the hellfire. And the Prophet ﷺ gives us the hadith where he gives us an analogy and says that the situation is that I am next to a fire, and you all, human beings, are like moths, insects. They're attracted to the fire. They want to go to it, not realizing that the fire is going to burn them and kill them. And the Prophet ﷺ is sitting there trying to divert all of these insects and moths from entering their doom, going towards their doom. And so the fire represents the love of this life, our desires, and we're attracted to it. And then Allah sends the prophets to take us away from that towards paradise. Right? And so for the Prophet ﷺ, even though so-and-so is an enemy and has done harm to him and his family and his followers, he still maintains the mercy towards them in that he sees them going towards hellfire, going to fall into hellfire. And he wants to save them. Why? Because, well, I think any of us would. When you really think of it from that angle. Your worst enemy, the person who has harmed you most in life, they're walking and they're about to fall off a cliff unknowingly. They don't know. Would we not shout and do all that we can do to stop the person and warn them, hey, you're about to fall in a cliff? And I think the general answer is yes. Right? We would. We would let go of our pride and our ego for a moment and try and save that person. And so when we are willing to do that, there still is this love that, you know what, yes, you have been my enemy for a while and you have harmed me. I don't like you, and you have done injustices to me. But there still maintains a type of love where although I don't like you, there's still an amount of care I have for you, and that's the love. And so, Bast, the deeper we get into our good characters and these characteristics, it cannot really manifest or flourish until we develop an amount of love, general love for all of the creation. Right? And so the station, although it's a short one, and it's general, it still has this very, very noble end goal. And it is calling us to love the creation. And by love the creation, let's just be very specific. I don't mean it in a irresponsible spiritual sense where, do whatever you want, it's okay, I still love you unconditionally and whatnot. That's not what I'm talking about here. A sin is a sin. And we don't like the sin. We will speak out against the sin. We will do amr bil ma'ruf and nahy al munkar. We will enjoy good and prohibit and discourage evil. Right? So that's not what's meant here. But the love is that I care enough for you in that I want you to be in paradise. Right? Even though I might not like you. That's the love we're talking about here. Just to make that clear. And let's see here. So Abu Ismail rahimahullah ta'ala says, and from the stations of iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'een, the station of expanding, I couldn't think of a more technical term for this, but maybe inshallah I'll look it up and do some research to find something a little bit more accurate. And then he says, right after, وَالتَّخَلِّ عَنِ الْقَبْضِ. So Bast, here he pairs it with its opposite, and that is leaving, what's the word I'm looking for? To leave behind the characteristic of holding on. Qabd is refraining, withholding, limiting. Right? So Bast is the opposite of that. And so here we better appreciate Bast, letting loose, letting go, by understanding its opposite, and that is holding on to or limiting. And so we don't want to limit our good characteristics. And a lot of times what ends up happening is that the biggest enemy to these good characteristics, or the biggest challenge to acquiring good characteristics, is our own self. And maybe a simple example is generosity. Allah loves generosity. He is the most generous. He loves those who are generous. Generosity with our money. Not irresponsibility with our money. Not unwise choices with our money, but generosity with our money. And no one was more generous than the Prophet ﷺ. Now, when we think of the time when we go to the banquets and whatnot, and they're asking for donations, and we want to donate, we all go through that inner struggle. I don't want to, I have some things I want to buy, I'd rather use it for this, and there's this challenge that goes on. Now, there's no one there stopping you. Nothing. It's your own self. And so what happens is, when we don't behave with bast, we behave with qabd. It's either or. And so in order to truly live by this station, we need to know what limits the good characteristics we are trying to live by. And most of the time it goes back to the self. Forgiveness doesn't cost any money. It doesn't require any effort. It's just this, I forgive you. I mean, you don't even need to say it. All you need to do is in your heart say, oh Allah, I forgive so-and-so. That's it. It doesn't take any time, doesn't take any money, doesn't take any effort, any energy. But how many times do we find ourselves saying, I don't want to forgive so-and-so? I don't. It's just the inner struggle. It's the self that's holding it back. And so we need to let go of that. Abu Ismail rahimahullah ta'ala, or Ibn Qayyim rahimahullah alayhi says that the three levels of the station are as follows. The first level is bast with other people, applying the station with other people. Whereas the second and the third level is applying it with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we'll see what that means in just a second. Abu Ismail rahimahullah ta'ala says, now he's going to define the station. Al-inbisat, irsalu sajiyya, wa tahashi min wahshat al-hashma, or hishma. So, a lot of technical terms here. I'll do my best to try and translate it in a way that makes sense. What is bast? Well, he says that irsal as-sajiyya. Sajiyya is more commonly used to refer to a general type of givingness. Now, sajiyya is not at the level of generosity. It's not karam. But sajiyya is just this willingness to spend on things. And so when I buy myself clothes, or I buy clothes for my family, now as the man of the household, I'm responsible, I'm obligated to do it. And if I buy, my spouse or my children clothes that they need, we wouldn't call that an act of generosity. That's just me spending. But it is an act of sajiyya, of spending and giving. There is good in it. However, here, the word means at-tabi', just natural self. When a person behaves with their natural self. So, some people, it's natural for them to smile. That's just how they are. They've always been like that since a child. They just smile. Whereas others, they actually need to put effort to smile. That's just how they are. It's a personality, right? And Allah or the Prophet ﷺ teaches us that when Adam ﷺ was created, Allah sent an angel to gather dirt from various or different types of dirt. And so the different personalities go back to that. Some people are their DNA is that they are an easygoing person, a smiling person. Other people, their DNA that they're not as easygoing, right? So sajiyya here is the self. There's this natural behavior. And irsal, you're doing irsal to it, is that we are letting our natural selves take over when it comes to our behavior. Now, this is a little bit interesting. This is strange, right? Because it seems to contradict the hadith I just mentioned. That for some people, they are naturally stern. They are naturally stingy. And they need to get over that in order to become a generous person. It's just something Allah His qadar has made it that way. They need to learn how to become generous. Whereas some people are just generous, from their own nature. And so this goes back to I think it goes back to an issue scholars discussed. Is the human being, when it comes to these good characteristics, are all human beings born with those characteristics, but then with time they are corrupted and tainted or lost? Or is the human being born neutral? They don't have these good characteristics, but they also don't have the bad characteristics. And then life goes on and the person makes choices and it develops their personality. That's the second opinion. A third opinion is that the human being is born and their natural disposition is more on the side of poor character. Not evil character, poor character. So Allah says, وَكَانَ الْإِنسَانُ جَهُولًا. Human beings are ignorant. عَجُولًا. They are hasty, meaning that they are driven by their desires. And it's desires that lead to hastiness. وَكَانَ وَكَانَ الْإِنسَانُ ضَعِيفًا. Human beings are weaker. ظَلُوم. They make a lot of poor choices. So you have these three opinions, and perhaps Abu Ismail rahimahullah ta'ala, when he's saying that we let our natural self take over when it comes to our good characteristics, perhaps he subscribes to the first opinion, where the human being is naturally a generous creation, naturally a forgiving, merciful creation, but society or the parents or life, the person is corrupted, or they lose those characteristics, and thus they need to revive them. Allah Ta'ala alam. And then والتحاشي من وحشة الحشمة. التحاشي means to stay away from something. So when we say حاشا لله, someone says something wrong about Allah or something that is not befitting to Allah, we say حاشا لله. I mean, Allah is distant from that, He's away from it. So at-tahashi means being distant from what? Min wahshat al-hishma. Wahsha is what occurs when it's kind of this feeling of loneliness, or the feeling of loneliness, or when a person feels that they're it's kind of only them. And this could happen when it comes to very good character. So when we go to, our Eastern ethnic countries, and there's a lot of social problems, social challenges there. When I was in Jordan and I would behave with my kind of American social norms and customs, where you wait in line, the people there look at me and kind of make fun of me. It's like, what are you doing, right? What a moron, It's like, oh, let's take advantage of this kid or this guy. And so what ends up happening is when you try and maintain that, it's right. This is the right thing to do. And you try to maintain it in a society that you're the only one doing it, it becomes difficult to maintain it, right? And so we need to get over that challenge. Guess what? Allah wants us to be generous, but most people aren't going to be generous with you. Allah wants us to be forgiving, but most people aren't going to be forgiving with you. And so we need to get over that. And so, as Ibn Qayyim rahmatullah alayhi is defining it or explaining here, he says to let go or to stay away, you need to actively divert this feeling when we apply these good characteristics with the one we love and the one we are trying to serve. And so if you remember, as we began this and in previous stations, good character is about benefiting the other person. This is the idea in Islam, that prophets were sent for the enrichment and the embetterment of humanity. They got nothing out of what they did from humanity. The rewards with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is one of the repeated phrases of prophets in the Quran. Right? وَمَا أَسْأَلُكُمْ عَلَيْهِ مِنْ أَجْرٍ. I don't ask you for any compensation, no reward. I'm not making money off of this. I'm not looking for prestige. I'm not looking for reputation. I'm not looking for political position or authority or anything like that. My reward's with Allah. All the prophets, all the messengers made this clear to their people. Right? And so they were sent to serve the betterment of humanity. And so we, as the followers of prophets, and the prophets have the best character, this needs to become our mindset. When I am generous, and again, this is a huge challenge in really in society at large. We have this notion where if you don't invite me, I'm not inviting you. If you don't get me a gift, I'm not getting you a gift. And this is common. We all know it. I mean, you're shaking your head. This is how it is. And again, this is a challenge I faced when I was in Jordan. You need to learn how to be the one who starts the good. And as the Prophet ﷺ teaches us, that the one who begins the salam is better than the one who returns the salam. And so, the challenge is that if I'm the one who starts the good, after the person has already expressed their lack of care, right, then I'm made fun of. I'm seen as weak in society. That's unfortunate. That's a challenge. There's something we need to get over, right? And again, I'm not saying that we are irresponsible or unwise in the decisions we make. Some people need a stick to the head, right? They need a stick to the head. But in general, so that's the general idea here, is that Bast is deepening our character by understanding the end goal of this is that in my love for humanity, right, I am trying to enrich them and benefit them the way the prophets did. Right? The way the prophets did, not the way modern society does, where I need to accept you regardless of who you are. And this has become the challenge now. If a man, someone who is born a male, decides that they're a female, they will say, you need to accept me because this is my decision. And if Islam will say, no, we're not going to accept you because it's a wrong decision. And you are harming yourself. The LGBT, the homosexual community, they do this. This is kind of their message. You need to accept me for who I am, unconditionally. And our response is, no. Our response is what Lut alayhi salam told his people who committed homosexuality. Inni li'amalikum min al-qalin. I despised your action. They want us to say, no, you cannot hate the sin. If you hate the sin, you hate us as well. We're going to say, no, we don't have to accept that premise. I can hate the sin while still wanting good for you. Okay? I can tell you you're wrong with the intention being I want good for you, mercy for you. It's not about oppressing you, but that's a different topic. And then continuing this Abu Ismail's definition, وَهُوَ السَّيْرُ مَعَ الْجِبِلَّةِ, and it is walking with jibilla, can either mean one of two things. Jibilla can mean the creation, right? خَلَقْهُمْ وَالْجِبِلَّةَ الْأَوَّلِينَ, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says. About Allah, the one who created you and created humanity before you, the creation before you. Or jibilla can mean ma jubila alay, kind of the natural human disposition, which we were talking about earlier. But what's meant here, it seems like, or at least Ibn Qayyim has chosen, is that we walk with the natural human disposition, the fitrah. And again, this goes back to the position that we are born with the good inside of us. We are born with generosity. We are born with forgiveness and mercy and all of that. And we need to walk with it. وَهُوَ عَلَى ثَلَاثِ دَرَجَاتٍ. It is on 3 levels. الدرجة الأولى, and remember the first level is applying the station with humanity, with mankind. الانبساط مع الخلق, being expansive with the creation. وَهُوَ أَنْ لَا تَعْتَزِلَهُمْ, and it is by not isolating yourself from them. Not isolating yourself from them. And this goes back to the hadith, the one who mixes with people and is patient with them is better than the one who doesn't mix with people and is not patient with them. Right? ضَنًّا عَلَى نَفْسِكَ أو شُحًّا عَلى حظك. And so we don't isolate ourselves, because when we isolate ourselves, why is that? Why would a person isolate themselves from broader society? Here it's mentioning 2 things. That either it goes back to the preservation of the ego. When I mix with people, they offend me, they harm me, they hurt my feelings, right? They're difficult to deal with, and that puts stress on my body. And so I want to preserve my emotions, my psyche, myself, by isolating myself from broader society. This doesn't mean specific individuals. Again, we need to be clear here. Someone is just a toxic person. They're a troublemaker. You want to stay away from that person, that's fine. But we're talking here about broader society. أو شحًا على حظك. Another reason is that I isolate myself socially because I know if I mix with other people, I'm going to have to do certain social responsibilities. where, part of the norm is that if someone, for example, travels and they come back, they bring sweets to spread to people, right? Like me, right? That's kind of out of the norm. And so if someone says, well, I don't want to spend that money, and so they isolate themselves to stay out of social responsibilities. Or if someone who knows a lot of people is going to be invited to a lot of weddings, and with in most cultures, or at least our cultures, you give a little bit of a monetary gift. Now, if you're getting invited every other week, I mean, that's a budget. In Chicago, it's a huge Arab community there. I mean, my mom and my sister are invited, especially in the summer. Sometimes they have 3-4 weddings a week. It's just all out. And imagine you're giving gifts every single time. That's going to add up. And so someone might isolate themselves. Well, I don't want to do that. And so applying Bast is about accepting the realities and not isolating ourselves because of the challenges of dealing with society, or because we're trying to preserve or maintain or hold on to our blessings in life. And so what we find here is that generosity and stinginess are really an essence, the foundation of this first level. And I have often mentioned generosity as being one of the most important characteristics of Iman. It's very important. Why? Because as I am growing and learning and my own responsibilities are expanding, I am seeing that generosity is not just doing good for humanity. There's more going on here, subhanAllah. And I always wondered why Allah often in the Quran says that He is the one who expands wealth for some people and withholds from other people. There's a lot of wisdom there, qada and qadar, accepting. Some people, they're born in a society, in a country where, they're just bound to be poor. That's just the way it is, subhanAllah. There is that element to it, but I think there's also another idea being presented, and that is the way we see money, perceive money, and spend money says a lot about our perception of Allah. It says a lot about our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Someone who truly trusts Allah is more likely to be generous. Why? Because they know that Allah is the one who provides, not me. And they believe and they trust that Allah is going to replace, based on Quran and what the Quran and Hadith say, Allah is going to replace all that I spend. And so when someone is responsibly, again, being very clear here, when someone is responsibly generous, right, it really says a lot about their trust in Allah. Also, generosity is a characteristic that seeps into other characteristics. It seeps into courage. A courageous person is almost always generous, and a generous person is almost always courageous, because it requires courage to let go of some of your money. It does. I don't know if I'm going to get this back. Yeah, Allah promises He's going to return it. I don't know how. I don't know when. I don't know what's going to happen in life. And that's why the reward for generosity is multiplied immensely in times of uncertainty. Like, the COVID, or at least during the beginning of COVID, we don't know. The economy is going crazy. Jobs are being lost left and right. And people are in need. It's a time of uncertainty. I don't know what tomorrow holds for me. And so being generous in such a time requires a lot of courage. Also, a courageous person, a generous person is also going to be generous in their manners, in their forgiveness. So it seeps over. And we find that generosity has a lot to do with bast and good character. And then continuing the first level, وَتَسْتَرْسِلْ لَهُمْ فِي فَضْلِكَ. And a bast with the creation allows you to really create a type of consistent flow of good towards humanity. Some people, every now and then, they do an act of generosity. Every now and then. But it's not a constant stream, a constant flow of generosity. For some people, they might end up forgiving someone, but it takes a while for them to accept it. It took me 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, 10 years to finally forgive so-and-so. And I forgave them. That is good. There's virtue and reward in that. Right? But as we mentioned, the difference between adab and akhlaq is that a khuluq is when it becomes part of that self, the natural self. And so bast is about that. And bast is about creating and maintaining a constant flow of good emanating from you to other people. وَتَسِعُهُمْ بِخُلُقِكَ. And this is so beautiful. What Abu Ismail is saying here is that you make room for other people. Meaning your heart becomes big enough where you take care of the other person. And it's not about them taking care of you or about it being mutual. And to understand this better, as parents, we have to deal with kids. And from kids, the younger they are, the more immature they are, the poorer decisions they make, the more they frustrate you, and you just have to deal with them. Right? But you being the older person, the more mature person, you have more ability to hold them, to embrace them than they have to embrace you. And so Bast is about developing this characteristic where we view ourselves as mature enough to embrace humanity, even when humanity is immature and cannot do the same for you. So the prophets being the prime example here, the prophets did this wonderfully. They were able to embrace and hug and be merciful towards humanity when humanity didn't do the same for them. Right? And so our character, and when we start applying Bast, these characteristics that we've been mentioning become large enough to where we are now able to embrace humanity, even if they don't do the same for us. وَتَدَعُهُمْ يَطَؤُونَكَ. And this is another beautiful saying. And you let them, you're patient with them, you allow them to step over you. Well, again, this doesn't mean we let our dignity be lost. As the Prophet ﷺ tells us that a believer is not humiliated, nor does he allow him or herself to be humiliated. So here we don't mean you allow people to humiliate you. But what is meant here is that you allow them to benefit from you. It's hard, it's difficult to be generous with the people who are stingy with you. It's difficult to be forgiving and patient with people who don't do the same for you. That's just a fact of the matter. When we going back to the Eastern culture, the longer you live with them, the more you start adopting their characteristics and you become like them. And so it becomes a challenge to preserve good character. And so part of it is accepting that you're not going to get much from them. But that's okay. If they benefit from you, that's the virtue, even if you don't benefit from them. وَالْعِلْمُ قَائِمٌ وَشُهُودُ الْمَعْنَى دَائِمٌ. وَالْعِلْمُ قَائِمٌ. Here, Abu Ismail is making it clear that when we talk about good characteristics, right, good character is based on knowledge. Meaning, we don't define for ourselves what is good character and what is, generosity, what is forgiveness. But rather, it is Quran and Sunnah that define it and qualify it. They tell us this is when you be forgiving, and this is when you don't forgive. So, for example, Allah Subhanahu wa Taala talking about the punishment of fornication, the lashes. What does Allah say in the verse? وَلَا تَأْخُذْكُمْ بِهِمَا رَأْفَةٌ. Don't allow your mercy and your compassion to cause you not to apply the punishment. Right? So we might want to forgive these people for their sin, but Allah is saying that now is not the time to forgive. And another example is when a lady from a prestigious background stole. She was stealing, and she was caught and proven guilty. or she admitted, I forgot the exact details. And so the Prophet ﷺ, ordered to carry out the punishment of theft, which is the cutting of the hand. And so some members of Medina said, this is so-and-so, we can't let her go through this, so let's go and talk to the Prophet ﷺ. So they asked Usama bin Zayd to go and talk to the Prophet ﷺ and intercede on her behalf. Why? Because Usama bin Zayd was known as being the beloved of the Prophet ﷺ. So Usama went and said, Ya Rasulullah, forgive her, etc. She won't do it again. The Prophet got extremely upset. His face became red. He said, the people before you, right, when a poor person would do a crime, they would execute the punishment. But when a wealthier and a prestigious person did a crime, they would forgive the person. And for that reason, their civilization would fall apart. That's just a fact of the matter. When injustice becomes clear and prevails, society falls apart. And he said, if Fatima, the daughter of Muhammad ﷺ, were to steal, I would cut her hand. And so that's not a time for forgiveness. And so when Abu Ismail says, we apply these characters with knowledge, it means that it is Quran and Sunnah that determines what is generosity, when should we be generous and when we shouldn't be generous, when we should be forgiving and when we should not be forgiving. وَشُهُودُ الْمَعْنَى دَائِمٌ. What this means is, shuhud al-ma'na, here shuhud goes back to the way we've been using it throughout this book, that we observe Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so when we apply these good characteristics, it is important to observe Allah's presence in that. Meaning, why am I being generous? It's not just out of for the sake of humanity. You have a lot of people today in the Western world who are very humane. They will be generous, they will be forgiving, they are compassionate, they are soft in their speech because they have a general love for humanity. They believe in this message that we need to be good human beings and good with each other. Right? We, as Muslims, when we do these things, it's out of the observance of Allah. And these good characteristics play a huge role when it comes to our relationship with Allah. That is the end goal. Right? And so when we apply these good characteristics at the individual level, we do it for the sake of Allah, for for Allah's pleasure. Now, Allah being the most merciful, all of these things that He tells us, encourages us to do, ends up benefiting humanity at large. And so the things we do, yes, enriches humanity, but our intention is that we're doing it for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so when we do these things, our heart needs to be with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that also includes a persistency and consistency in applying these things. So generosity, if we do it at the human level, what's going to dictate our generosity really goes back to who deserves it, who doesn't deserve it, who's good to me, who's not good to me, what are the benefits, and whatnot. But when we do it for the sake of Allah, all of those things become irrelevant, because I am being generous for the sake of Allah, seeking His reward. And so this reminds me of a hadith where an individual gave sadaqah. And in the morning, people are saying someone gave charity to a wealthy person. Right? So this person was fooled by a wealthier person to take the charity. So what happens, these beggars and whatnot, they have money, they have whatever. It's their job, literally. And so they go around pretending to be poor, when in reality they're wealthy. And so this person gave charity to a person who was wealthy, actually wealthy, but they thought they were poor. So in the morning, people started saying, someone gave charity to a wealthy person. And then another time, the same person gave charity to a prostitute, not knowing she's a prostitute. And in the morning, people woke up and said, someone gave charity to a prostitute. And there was a third one, I forgot what it is. And one of the lessons of this hadith is that when it comes to generosity and charity, yes, we should be wise in who we give to. There are some people who are more deserving than others. And so if you have two people, one is a pious person who's going to use that money in a way that is pleasing to Allah, and you have another person who is going to use it to, drink alcohol or gamble or whatever. Of course, we're going to give it to the first person, right? But at the same time, what this hadith is teaching us is don't over research. You don't need to know everything this person is doing. You see a general need, just give. Sometimes what happens is that, does this person really need money, or are they just trying to make extra money? Are they trying to steal from me? Look, it could be the case where they're trying to steal from you. But if the general image of need is there, then don't let these suspicions hold you back. Give. And your reward is with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? So, dawam shuhud al-ma'na is observing Allah in this good character, meaning our heart is attached to Allah when we apply it, and also it means that we are consistent in doing it. We're not just generous every now and then. We're not forgiving every now and then, but it's something that is constantly with us. الدرجة الثانية, the second level, الانبساط مع الحق, applying bast with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وهو أن لا يحبسك خوف ولا يحجبك رجاء ولا يحول بينك وبينه آدم ولا حواء. Subhanallah. So the second level is when we apply bast with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now remember, good character is from Allah and goes back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the more we are able to observe Allah in these characteristics, then the deeper we're able to dig and to apply. And now what he says here, he expands a little bit more. He says that when we observe Allah in our good character, part of it is the following. We have fear and we have hope. Let's use the example of giving charity. When we give charity, we fear any negative consequences for giving. Do I need this money or not? What's going to happen if I give it? Will I get it back? So there's fear. And that fear might hold us back from applying these characteristics. And there's also raja, hope. When we do good deeds, we have hope. I am hopeful in something in return. Right? And we cannot let this hope cause us to be veiled or blinded. And I'll get to that in just a second. And we don't allow Adam or Hawa, Adam or Eve, and I think what's meant here is that we don't let any human being come between us and these good characteristics. So what is all this referring to? Now the first one is pretty simple. When we fear certain consequences or something, it's going to hold us back from doing good character, being good in our characteristics. As for being veiled by our hope, okay, so hope here is referring to when we have hope in another person. Let's say there's a wealthy person, and this wealthy person has opportunities, etc. I might be drawn to that person because I want something from him or her. My relationship to that person isn't because I seek to benefit that person, but rather I seek to benefit from that person. And so raja, hope here, this has nothing to do with hope in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but when our hope is attached to the creation. Essentially what happens here is that this is going to block us from al-bast, from good character. Why? Because now it becomes about benefiting ourselves through other people. And good character, as we see, is about benefiting others from what we have. And so this flip effect occurs. Also, when we have hope in someone else, it taints our character negatively. So we call them, oh, you're such a suck up. Sometimes a little bit more vulgar language, you kiss his butt or something like that, in order to benefit, right? So it harms our character. And I believe it's Imam al-Shafi'i, or one of the scholars, said something very beautiful that when you really think about it, you see how true it is. The more we glorify a human being or a created entity, in reality, it leads to humiliating the self, downplaying the self. SubhanAllah, it's really interesting. The more we glorify a creation, a created entity, a human being, the more that will negatively impact who we are and our dignity. So the example is a rich person. If we glorify that person, if we love them in a way that's unhealthy, spiritually speaking, it's going to do something to our own selves. And perhaps an example is as follows for the young ladies in these actresses and who are engineered in their body and their physical image, surgery after surgery, makeup after makeup, style after style. Right? They're seen as perfect. And so when this young 12-year-old girl is looking at these models, and then she looks at herself in the mirror and says, where am I to these ladies? It ends up hurting the self. And what we find is that over the past decade, 10 years, depression rates in women, especially young girls, has skyrocketed, like tripled. And researchers say that, it's with social media, they're constantly being exposed to these images and photography and videos and women posing, and they compare these women with themselves, saying, where am I to these ladies? And they become depressed. And so if this girl did not glorify this model or this actress, or because she is glorifying this model, this actress, it's harming the self. It is downplaying her own self, her own dignity. And so we cannot let our raja, our hope in what other people have, cause us to be veiled from who we really are, our potential, and more importantly, from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and what He has. Also, when we do that, it limits our ability to reach our perfect self, the best version of ourselves, right? In the context of good character. And then, وَلَا يَحُولُ بَيْنَكَ وَبَيْنَهُ آدَمْ وَلَا حَوَّاء. What's meant here is that we see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as being the closest person to us. And the reason why Abu Ismail rahimahullah ta'ala points to Adam and Hawa is that they are our mother and our father. They are our mother and our father. And so part of Bast is being able to see Allah as the closest to us, even closer than our parents. And so and that includes that Allah is more closer to us and also more merciful to us and more compassionate towards us than our mother and our father. There's also a second meaning here, that we see Allah as our creator, and that we are not just a product of causes and effects, of reproduction. That I'm not here because my parents, got married and I came about, but rather Allah created me. And so the more we see ourselves directly attached and connected to Allah, the more we are able to foster Bast. The more we are able to provide ourselves with a platform, a foundation to really build off of. Why? Because again, as we mentioned earlier, it's all about doing this for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And therefore, the more we can see Allah's nearness to us, inshallah, the easier it becomes for us to live by this. And then finally, الدرجة الثالثة, the third level, الانبساط مع رب الأرباب, applying Bast with the Lord of Lords. And What's meant here is that we never are complacent with our status. Why? Not because of what the creation deserves or what I am capable of doing with my resources. What the creation deserves is limited. My resources are also limited. But when our bast is done with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah being the infinite is capable of giving us infinite things. And so there's never a limit to Allah's mercy. I can always get more mercy from Allah. Allah can always be more generous with me. He can always give me more. And we explained this in previous stations. And so when we apply bast with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's important to remember that. The more I give, the more Allah is going to give me. The more I forgive, the more Allah is going to forgive me. The more patient I am with others, the more patient Allah is going to be with me. And this is a very standard and basic principle in Islamic aqeedah, in Islamic creed, that the way we treat the creation is how Allah is going to treat us. And it's quite clear in Quran and Hadith. Also, what it means is, it has this meaning of, I am never fully complacent with what I have done. What I have done is never enough to befit Allah's majesty. Also, it has the meaning of recognizing my need for Allah. I need more of Allah's mercy. If my success, my happiness goes back to Allah's mercy, I need it more. I need more of it. And so, how do we acquire it? Well, part of it is doing good. And so, the more I realize my need for Allah's mercy, for His generosity, for His patience, for His forgiveness, the more I want to apply that with other people in hope and aspiration that Allah is going to give me more. So the more I feel in need of Allah, the more I will apply these good deeds in hope that Allah is going to give me more of what I want or what I need. And then this all goes back to this last level, all goes back to making sure our good character, our good deeds doesn't deceive us into seeing ourselves as something. Doesn't deceive us into thinking that I have done enough, I am doing good, but rather it's not enough in respect to Allah. Right? It's not enough. I don't know if Allah accepted it. I want more. I know the day of judgment is 50,000 years. It's a drastic day, and I just need more. And so the more we are able to do it, the more we are able to build this perception, the more natural bast is going to happen. And so it's no longer about the creation. Yes, I care for the creation, but remember, this is kind of the previous levels. The more we deepen in bast, the more it becomes me and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah and me. And so what was I going to say? Slipped my mind. And so I do this because I seek from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Also, it has the meaning of understanding and realizing that whatever good I do, if I see Allah as being the closest to me, then it is Allah who is empowering me with these characteristics to do this good. He is the one who provided me with a platform, with the resources to do the good. And therefore, how can I be proud of myself? I can only be thankful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There's no other explanation. Allah ta'ala a'lam. With that, we conclude the station of al-bast. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us from among them, Ya Rabbal Alameen. Wa sallallahu ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'in.